The red dust of Bitter Creek hung in the air like a shroud, painting everything the color of dried blood. Jonah Pike squinted against the late afternoon sun as his mare picked her way down the main street, her hooves raising small clouds that joined the perpetual haze. The rhythmic clang of hammer on anvil rang out from the blacksmith's shop, punctuating the low murmur of voices from the saloon porches. He'd ridden 3 days through scorched grassland to reach this speck of civilization, if it could be called that. Bitter Creek sat like a scab on the Wyoming territory, a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the endless prairie. The Union Pacific was pushing a spur line through here, or so the rumors said. Progress, they called it. Jonah had seen enough progress to last him a lifetime. Hart's boarding house stood at the north end of town, a 2-story clapboard structure that somehow managed to look both sturdy and weary. Like a woman who'd weathered too many storms but refused to bend. The sign hanging from the porch was freshly painted. Standing out against the sun-bleached wood of the building, someone cared about appearances. At least, Jonah dismounted, his joints protesting after days in the saddle. He was 35, but his body felt older, carrying the weight of too many battles, too many ghosts. His hand moved unconsciously to the Colt at his hip, a gesture born of habit and hard-won caution. The front door opened before he could knock. A woman stood in the doorway, straight-backed and watchful. She couldn't have been more than 30, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes the color of winter sage. Her dress was plain black wool, high-necked and proper, but there was nothing meek about the way she held herself. Mrs. Hart. Jonah removed his hat, slapping it against his thigh to knock off the dust. I am. You looking for a room? Yes, ma'am. Few nights, maybe longer. She studied him with those sage-green eyes, taking in the worn cavalry boots, the sun-faded blue of his shirt, the way he stood balanced, ready, a soldier's stance, even years after the uniform came off. $2 a week, paid in advance, breakfast at 6, supper at 7, no drinking in the rooms, no visitors after 9, no firearms at the dinner table. She rattled off the rules like a drill sergeant. You have any problem with those terms, Mr. Pike, Jonah Pike? And no, ma'am, no problems. She stepped aside to let him enter. The interior was spotless, smelling of lye soap and beeswax. Everything in its place, from the arranged newspapers on the side table to the precisely aligned chairs in the parlor. This was a woman who valued order, who fought chaos with cleanliness and routine. You'll be in room 3, upstairs on the right. Wash basins fresh filled every morning. Chamber pot gets emptied at dawn, leave it in the hall if needed. She moved with brisk efficiency, leading him up the narrow stairs. You missed supper, but there's cold beef and biscuits in the kitchen if you're hungry. Much obliged. She paused at the door to his room, key in hand. I run a respectable establishment. Mr. Pike, I don't tolerate trouble. Don't plan on causing any, ma'am. Plans have a way of changing out here. She handed him the key. Welcome to Bitter Creek. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the street. Jonah set his saddlebags on the floor and moved to the window, watching the town settle into evening. Lamps were being lit in windows, casting yellow rectangles of light onto the dusty street. A group of women in severe bonnets hurried past, clutching their shawls against the evening chill. They glanced up at the boarding house with expressions of barely concealed disapproval. He was washing the trail dust from his face when he heard the voices downstairs loud, aggressive, demanding. His hand found his Colt before his mind fully registered the threat. Old habits. Jonah moved silently down the stairs, stopping just out of sight. Through the parlor doorway, he could see Mrs. Hart facing 3 men. The one doing the talking was lean and wolf-like, with pale eyes and a scar that pulled his mouth into a permanent sneer. The other 2 flanked him like trained dogs, hands resting on their gun butts. Now, Eliza, the scarred man was saying, his voice oily with false friendliness. "We both know Thomas owed me, with him being deceased and all. That debt falls to you." "My husband's debts died with him. Mr. Cade." Mrs. Hart's voice was steady, but Jonah caught the slight tremor in her hands. "Whatever arrangement you had—" "Arrangement?" Luther Cade laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your husband promised me use of that back storage building for my merchandise. That promise stands, widow or no widow. I told you before, I won't have stolen goods on my property." Cade's expression hardened. "Who said anything about stolen? I'm a legitimate businessman. Just need some temporary storage. You're being unreasonable." "The answer is no." One of Cade's men, barely more than a boy with an patchy attempt at a mustache, shifted restlessly. "Boss, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Virgil." Cade stepped closer to Mrs. Hart. "You might want to reconsider. This town ain't always safe for a woman alone. Accidents happen, fires start, windows break." Jonah had heard enough. He stepped into the parlor, keeping his hand casual but ready. "Evening, folks. Everything all right here? Mrs. Hart." Cade's pale eyes flicked to him, assessing. "This ain't your concern, stranger." "Well now, I'm a paying guest in this establishment. That makes the lady's welfare my concern." Jonah moved to stand beside Mrs. Hart. Not quite in front of her, she didn't strike him as the type who'd appreciate being shielded, but close enough to intervene. "Jonah Pike," Cade said slowly, recognition dawning. "The Jonah Pike heard about you. Thought you disappeared after that business at Fort Laramie." "Man's got a right to disappear." Sure. Also heard you'd lost your taste for gunplay. Gone soft." Jonah smiled, a cold thing that didn't reach his eyes. "Why don't you step off the lady's porch and we can discuss how soft I've gotten?" The boy, Virgil, made the mistake of going for his gun. He was young and eager and slow. Jonah's Colt cleared leather and barked once. Virgil screamed, clutching his shoulder as his pistol clattered across the floor. The other man froze, hand halfway to his weapon. "The next one goes center mass," Jonah said conversationally. "Now pick up your friend and get out." Cade's scarred face twisted with rage, but he was too smart to push it. "Not here, not now. This ain't over. Pike, you just bought yourself a world of trouble." He looked at Mrs. Hart. "Both of you. Come on, boys." They left, Virgil whimpering as the other man half carried him out. Jonah kept his Colt drawn until he heard their horses moving away, then holstered it and turned to Mrs. Hart. She was pale but composed, already moving to clean up the blood on her clean floor. "You shouldn't have done that." Seemed like the right thing at the time. She looked up at him, those sage eyes unreadable. "Luther Cade doesn't forgive. He'll be back with more men." "I figured as much." "Then why—" Jonah considered the question. Why had he stepped in? He'd come to Bitter Creek to disappear, to find some quiet corner where his ghosts couldn't find him. Instead, he just painted a target on his back. Man threatens a lady in her own home. Somebody ought to stand up. He picked up Virgil's dropped pistol, checked the loads, and offered it to her. "You know how to use this?" "My husband taught me." She took the weapon, checking it with practiced ease. "For all the good it did him." "What did he owe Cade?" "Nothing. Thomas was many things. Mr. Pike, but he wasn't a thief. Luther Cade wanted to use our storage building for his stolen goods, probably weapons and liquor for the Indians. Knowing him, Thomas refused. 2 weeks later, my husband was dead, shot in the back on the road to Cheyenne. Sheriff called it a robbery, but nothing was taken." The picture was becoming clearer. "And now Cade figures you'll be easier to pressure." "He figured right, until tonight." She set the pistol on the mantel. "You've made an enemy. He'll come back with his whole gang." "How many—" 8, maybe 10. They hole up in the canyon country north of here. Sheriff Dawes won't go after them, says it's out of his jurisdiction. Or he's scared. That too. She moved to the window, peering out at the darkened street. I should board up the windows. I'll help. You got lumber? In the shed. They worked in silence for the next hour, boarding up the ground floor windows. Other residents of the boarding house, a traveling merchant and an elderly schoolteacher, wisely kept to their rooms. As they worked, Jonah noticed the precise way Mrs. Hart measured and cut, the efficiency of her movements. This was a woman who'd learned to do for herself. There's a late train tomorrow, she said as they finished the last window. You could be on it. Could be, but you won't. Probably not. She turned to face him in the lamplight. Why, Mr. Pike, why stay and fight for strangers? Jonah thought of Fort Laramie, of orders followed and innocents dead, of nights when he woke gasping, phantom smoke in his lungs and the screams of burning teepees in his ears. Maybe I'm tired of running. Maybe I figure it's time to stand for something worth standing for. This won't bring back whoever you're trying to make amends to. He looked at her sharply, but there was no judgment in her face, only understanding. No, it won't, but maybe it'll help me sleep a little easier. Sheriff Harlan Dawes showed up as they were securing the front door, a thin man with nervous eyes and a badge that seemed too heavy for his narrow chest. Heard there was trouble. Luther Cade paid a visit, Mrs. Hart said. Mr. Pike encouraged him to leave. Heard that too. Virgil's over at Doc Holcomb's, crying about his shoulder. Dawes looked at Jonah with a mixture of respect and worry. You shot one of Cade's men. He drew first. Don't matter. Cade's got a long memory and a short fuse. Best thing would be for you to move on. Mr. Pike, find another town. Sheriff's right. Mrs. Hart said quietly. This isn't your fight. Jonah looked between them, the lawman who wouldn't stand up to outlaws, and the widow who'd been standing alone for too long. The red dust had settled with nightfall, but come morning it would rise again, painting everything the color of old blood, just like always. Appears to me it is now, he said. Besides, I paid for a week. Mrs. Hart doesn't strike me as the type to give refunds. The ghost of a smile crossed her face. No refunds. Mr. Pike, house rules. Sheriff Dawes sighed, knowing a lost cause when he saw one. Cade'll come with numbers. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. I'll see what I can do. They all knew what that meant, nothing. Dawes would find urgent business elsewhere when the shooting started, but Jonah didn't blame him. Some men weren't built for standing up. They just weren't built for it. After the sheriff left, Jonah helped Mrs. Hart check the locks one more time. You should send word to any friends you have. Family, maybe. No family. As for friends, she gestured toward town, where the good women had hurried past with their disapproving glances. A widow who runs a boarding house isn't quite respectable. Mr. Pike. Add in a husband who died under suspicious circumstances. And, well, let's just say I won't be missed at the church socials. Their loss. She studied him in the lamplight. You're an odd man, Jonah Pike. Been told that before. Get some rest. Tomorrow will come early. Jonah climbed the stairs to his room. But sleep was a long time coming. He sat by the window, watching the dark street and listening to the distant howl of coyotes. The red dust had settled, but it would rise again with the sun. It always did in places like Bitter Creek. Somewhere in the canyon country, Luther Cade was planning his return, and somewhere in this boarding house, a widow was probably doing the same thing. Jonah was checking weapons and wondering how much standing up was worth. Come morning, they'd find out. The morning came wrapped in silence, the kind that pressed against the ears and made a man check his weapons. Jonah woke before dawn, old habits refusing to die, and found Mrs. Hart already in the kitchen, measuring coffee grounds with the same precision she'd used on the window boards. "Sleep well?" she asked without looking up. "Well enough." He accepted the cup she offered, black and strong enough to float a horseshoe. "You." "I've had better nights." Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but her hands were steady. "Breakfast will be ready soon." The other boarders crept down like mice, the merchant clutching his sample case and the schoolteacher peering nervously through her spectacles. They ate quickly and quietly, the clink of forks on plates the only sound. When they finished, both made excuses about urgent business elsewhere. Within an hour, Hart's boarding house had 2 fewer residents. "Can't say I blame them." "Mrs.," Hart said, clearing their plates. "Most folks have sense enough to avoid trouble." "Most folks haven't had to stand for anything." Jonah helped her carry dishes to the kitchen. "Your book's up to date." She gave him a sharp look. "Why?" "Might want to look them over, make sure everything's in order." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "In case something happens to me." Just being practical. She led him to a small office behind the stairs, hardly bigger than a closet. The desk was as meticulously organized as everything else in her domain ledgers lined up, receipts filed, correspondence sorted. She pulled out the main account book, running her finger down columns of neat figures. "Here," she pointed to an entry from 6 months ago. Thomas received a deposit of $50 from Frontier Development Company, said it was for future improvements to the property. But he never made any improvements. And when I wrote to the address on the check, the letter came back undelivered. Jonah studied the entry. Frontier Development. Sounds official. Everything sounds official when lawyers write it. She turned the page. 2 weeks after that deposit, Thomas started refusing Cade's business proposals. 2 weeks after that, he was dead. "You think there's a connection?" "I think $50 is a lot of money for improvements that never happened." She closed the ledger. "But I can't prove anything." A knock at the front door interrupted them 3 sharp raps, deliberate and measured, not Cade's style. Too polite. Jonah checked his Colt while Mrs. Hart peered through the parlor window. "It's a woman," she said, surprise coloring her voice. The visitor was young, maybe 25, with auburn hair and clothes that marked her as quality, not fancy, but well-made and properly fitted. She carried a leather portfolio and had the direct gaze of someone used to asking questions and getting answers. "Mrs. Hart, my name is May Whitlock. I'm an investigator with the Territorial Commission." She produced credentials from her portfolio. "I wonder if I might have a word?" "Mrs." Hart glanced at Jonah, then stepped aside. "Please, come in. This is Mr. Pike, one of my boarders." Miss Whitlock's eyes assessed Jonah with professional interest. "The same Mr. Pike, who had an altercation with Luther Cade's men last night." Word travels fast. Jonah said, "It's a small town." She turned back to Mrs. Hart. "Actually, it's fortuitous that Mr. Pike is here. What I have to discuss concerns the safety of this establishment." They settled in the parlor, boards still covering the windows, lending the room a fortress-like quality. Miss Whitlock opened her portfolio and withdrew several documents. "Mrs. Hart, were you aware that your late husband had business dealings with Major Horace Bain?" The name hit the room like a stone in still water. "Mrs." Hart's composure cracked slightly. "Thomas mentioned him once or twice, something about railroad investments." "Major Bain owns Frontier Development Company," Miss Whitlock said. "Among other enterprises, he's been acquiring property along the proposed Union Pacific spur line." "By acquiring, you mean stealing," Jonah said, "when necessary." Miss Whitlock's tone was carefully neutral. "Though he prefers legal methods, loans that can't be repaid, taxes that suddenly come due, zoning violations that didn't exist until he needed them to." And when legal methods don't work, then men like Luther Cade become useful. She pulled out another document. This is a copy of a funds transfer from Bain's bank to an account linked to Cade. Date familiar. Mrs. Hart studied it, her face paling. 3 days before Thomas died. I'm sorry. Miss Whitlock's sympathy seemed genuine. Your property sits on a crucial junction for the railroad. Bain needs it. So he had my husband murdered. Proving that is another matter, which is why I'm here. She leaned forward. The Territorial Commission has been building a case against Bain for months. We need witnesses, documents, anything that connects him to criminal activity. I don't have Mrs. Hart began, then stopped. Wait, Thomas kept a safety deposit box at the bank, said it had important papers. I've never opened it. Do you have access? I have the key, but Mr. Cornwell at the bank has been difficult. Says I need proper authorization. Cornwell's in Bain's pocket, Jonas said. Half the town leadership is? Miss Whitlock nodded. Which is why we need to be careful. Mrs. Hart, would you be willing to attempt accessing that box with Mr. Pike as escort? Perhaps? Now hold on, Jonas said. Cade's still out there. Dividing our attention seems... The front door exploded inward. Jonah moved on instinct, tackling both women behind the overturned sofa as gunfire erupted. Windows shattered despite the boards, splinters flying like shrapnel. The attack lasted maybe 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. When the shooting stopped, Cade's voice drifted through the ruined doorway. Just a reminder. Pike, you and the widow got till sundown to reconsider my offer. Next time we won't knock. Hoofbeats receded into distance. Jonah helped the women up, checking for injuries. Aside from cuts from flying wood and glass, they were unhurt. So much for my front door, Mrs. Hart said, her voice admirably steady. Miss Whitlock was already making notes. I'll wire the commission. We need federal marshals here. That'll take days. Jonas said, we don't have days. Then we'd better move quickly. Mrs. Hart stood, brushing glass from her skirts. Mr. Cornwell opens the bank at 9. We could... No. Jonah studied the ruined entrance. That's what they expect. Cade didn't come here to kill us. Just scare us. Drive us into the open. Then what do you suggest? Before he could answer, boots sounded on the porch. Jonah drew, then relaxed as a familiar figure appeared, not familiar from yesterday, but from years past. Daniel Redbird stood in the doorway, taking in the destruction with dark, knowing eyes. He wore civilian clothes now, but he moved with the same quiet confidence Jonah remembered from their scouting days. Heard you were in town, Daniel said. Figured you could use help. Daniel. Jonah holstered his weapon. Been a while. Fort Laramie was a while. His expression said he remembered it as clearly as Jonah did. Heard Cade paid a visit. Among other problems, Jonah made introductions. Ladies, Daniel Redbird, best tracker I ever served with. Daniel, Mrs. Hart owns this establishment. Miss Whitlock is with the Territorial Commission. Daniel nodded politely. Ma'am, Miss... To Jonah, Cade's holed up at Widow's Arch with 8 men, but that's not your biggest problem. Let me guess, Bain? He's bringing in professionals. Pinkertons. Maybe worse. Train's due tomorrow. Daniel accepted the coffee misses. Hart offered, You remember Sergeant Holcomb? From the 7th. He's the doctor here now. Says Virgil the boy you shot is talking. Cade's planning something for tonight. The bank, Miss Whitlock said. They know we need those documents. Then we don't go to the bank. Mrs. Hart said quietly. Not the way they expect. She disappeared upstairs, returning with a Springfield rifle that had seen better days but looked well-maintained. This was Thomas's. I know another way into the bank through the connected buildings. We go now, while they're watching the roads." "Mrs. Hart," Miss Whitlock protested. "I can't allow—" Steele entered the widow's voice. "Miss Whitlock, this is my home, my fight. I've spent 6 months being proper and patient, while everyone whispered about my husband. I'm done being patient." Jonah exchanged glances with Daniel. Seeing his own thoughts reflected here was a woman with sand. "All right," he said, "but we do this smart. Daniel, can you create a distraction?" "Already planned. There's a brush fire going to start north of town in about 20 minutes. Nothing serious, but enough to draw attention." "Good. Miss Whitlock, you have a weapon." She produced a derringer from her portfolio. "I'm prepared." "Then let's move." They slipped out the back, keeping to the alleys. The town was eerily quiet, folks sensing trouble and staying indoors. The smell of the rain hung in the air, unusual for the season, but welcome. It might mask their movements. The bank sat on Main Street, a brick building trying to look more important than it was. But Mrs. Hart led them past it, to a millinery shop that shared a wall. Mrs. Cooper's place," she explained. "She's visiting her sister in Cheyenne. Thomas helped repair her roof last year. She gave us a key." Inside, bonnets and ribbons created a bizarre contrast to their armed group, Mrs. Hart moved to a storage room, pushing aside boxes to reveal a door. The buildings share a basement from when they were both owned by the same family. She produced another key. Thomas found it when he was working. The basement was musty and dark, but dry. They navigated by lamplight, finding the corresponding door into the bank's lower level. It opened onto a storage area filled with filing cabinets and unused furniture. "The safety deposit boxes are upstairs," Mrs. Hart whispered, "in Cornwell's office." They climbed narrow stairs, emerging behind the teller's cages. The bank was empty. Cornwell apparently trusting locks over guards. They found his office and the wall of deposit boxes behind his desk. "Mrs. Hart produced a small key. "Number 47. The box opened to reveal exactly what they'd hoped and feared. Documents linking Bain to frontier development, to suspicious land transfers, and most damning correspondence discussing removing obstacles to progress. Thomas Hart was mentioned by name. "This is it," Miss Whitlock breathed. "This is what we needed." "Then we'd better," Jonah froze. "Footsteps in the main bank." "Spread out," he whispered, drawing his Colt. The office door opened to reveal Mr. Cornwell himself, accompanied by 2 men Jonah didn't recognize city men, by their clothes, with the cold eyes of professional killers. "I thought I heard rats in my bank." Cornwell said, "Gentlemen, please remove these trespassers, permanently." The shooting started before anyone could negotiate. Jonah overturned Cornwell's desk. Providing cover for the women, Daniel materialized behind one of the gunmen like a ghost, his knife ending that threat quietly. The other dove behind a filing cabinet, trading shots with Jonah. Mrs. Hart crouched beside the deposit boxes, calmly loaded her Springfield. When the gunman popped up to fire, she put a round through his shoulder, spinning him into the open where Jonah could finish it. Cornwell, showing surprising speed for a banker, fled toward the front entrance. Miss Whitlock's derringer barked, and he stumbled, clutching his leg. "That's for denying a widow her rightful property," she said primly. They heard shouts from the street. The fire distraction had worn off. "Time to leave." "Can you walk?" Jonah asked Cornwell. The banker whimpered something about his rights. "Here's your rights," Daniel said. "You can crawl out of here and explain to Bain how you lost his documents, or we can leave you for Cade to find. Choose." They left him choosing and retreated the way they'd come, documents secured in Miss Whitlock's portfolio. Behind them, they could hear commotion as the town responded to gunfire in their sacred bank. Back at the boarding house, They barricaded what was left of the entrance and took stock. The documents were damning, but they needed to reach federal authorities to matter. "The telegraph office," Miss Whitlock said. "I can wire Bain owns the telegraph operator." "Mrs." Hart said flatly. "Nothing gets sent without his approval." "Then we need to get these papers out physically," Jonah said. "The morning train won't make it." Daniel stood at the window, watching the street. "Cade's coming, with friends." They looked out to see riders approaching not 8 or 10, but at least 15. Cade had recruited help. "Well, Mrs." Hart said, checking her rifle. "I suppose this is where we see what standing up really costs." A rare rumble of thunder punctuated her words. The unusual rain was coming, bringing with it a reckoning that had been 6 months in the making. Jonah checked his ammunition, thinking of all the battles he'd fought for worse reasons. At least this one mattered. "Daniel, how do you feel about evening odds?" His old friend smiled, the expression sharp as his knife. "Wouldn't be the first time." Miss Whitlock tucked the portfolio inside her bodice, proper behavior abandoned in favor of practicality. "Gentlemen, Mrs. Hart, it's been an honor." "Mrs." Hart pumped around into her Springfield's chamber. "The honor, Miss Whitlock, is mine. Now, let's show these buzzards what happens when they threaten honest folks." The riders stopped just outside rifle range. Cade's voice carried on the wind. "Last chance. Widow, give us the documents and pike, and you can keep your house." "Mrs." Hart's answer was a rifle shot that took the hat off one of Cade's men. "That's Mrs. Hart to you." The storm broke both the one in the sky and the one in the street. Rain began to fall as Luther Cade's men charged, and Hart's boarding house became a fortress under siege. The sand came like a living thing, a brown wall that swallowed the world. What had started as rain turned into something far worse, a dust storm riding on violent winds, turning the air thick as mud. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. Jonah had seen storms in his years on the frontier, but this was biblical. The howling wind shook the boarding house to its bones, and visibility dropped to arm's length. Cade's men, caught in the open, scattered like leaves. "Get away from the windows," Jonah shouted over the roar. But his warning came too late. The front window, one they hadn't boarded, exploded inward. A figure tumbled through, more by accident than design. "Mrs." Hart Springfield spoke, and the intruder dropped. Another shadow appeared at the ruined door, firing blind. Daniel's knife found him in the murk. "They're using the storm," Miss Whitlock called out, crouched behind an overturned table. The building groaned under the wind's assault. Somewhere upstairs, roof shingles tore away with sounds like gunshots. Sand poured through every crack, coating everything, getting in eyes and mouths and weapons. Jonah heard footsteps on the roof. Cade's men were trying to come from above. He grabbed Mrs. Hart's arm. "The kitchen, we need to hold the kitchen." They retreated through the house, the storm pursuing them like a demon. In the kitchen, Jonah kicked over the heavy table, creating a barricade. Daniel took position by the back door, barely visible through the swirling dust. A crash from upstairs they'd broken through, boots on the ceiling, moving toward the stairs. "I'll hold them," Mrs. Hart said, starting for the hallway. "No." Jonah pulled her back. "Together or not at all." The first man down the stairs caught Jonah's bullet in the chest. The second, smarter, fired from cover, splinters exploding from the doorframe. Mrs. Hart's rifle boomed, and the shooting stopped. Then, through the chaos, a child's scream. "That's the Morrison family," Mrs. Hart said, face white beneath the dust. "They live next door, their little girl." Without hesitation, she headed for the side door. Jonah cursed and followed, Daniel covering their rear. Outside was madness. The wind hit like a physical blow, sand scouring exposed skin. They couldn't see the Morrison house. Couldn't see anything but brown fury. Misses. Heart led by memory. One hand on the fence between properties. They found the family huddled in their parlor. Windows broken. The mother trying to shield 3 children from flying glass. The youngest, a girl maybe 6 years old, had a gash on her forehead. "We need to get them to shelter," Jonah shouted over the wind. The root cellar. Misses. Hart pointed through the murk. "Behind my house." They formed a human chain, Jonah leading. The Morrison parents carrying children. Mrs. Hart guiding. Daniel and Miss Whitlock as rear guard. Every step was a battle against the wind. Twice Jonah heard gunshots, impossible to locate in the storm. The cellar doors appeared like salvation. They tumbled down wooden steps into blessed stillness, though dust sifted through the floorboards above. "Is everyone?" Jonah's question cut short as lantern light revealed their situation. 2 of Cade's men had found the cellar first. They stood with guns drawn, grinning through dust-caked faces. "Well, well," one said. "Storm blew us some prizes." Everything happened at once. The Morrison children screamed. Daniel's hand moved to his knife. Jonah calculated angles, knowing any shooting risked the family. Then Mrs. Hart stepped forward, her rifle held loose but ready. "Pete Garrison, Bill Fitch, I know your mothers. They come to my kitchen for coffee when their husbands drink away the grocery money." The gunman shifted uncomfortably. "You think they'd be proud," she continued, voice steady as stone. "Threatening children in a storm. This what you've become. Riding with Cade." "Shut up," Pete said, but his gun hand wavered. "Your mother cried in my kitchen last week. Pete, worried sick about you. Said you'd fallen in with bad company." Mrs. Hart took another step. She was right. I said shut. The storm chose that moment to tear away part of the floor above. Debris crashed down. And in the confusion, Daniel moved. His knife took Bill's gun hand, while Jonah rushed Pete. They went down in a tangle, the gun firing into earthen wall. When the dust settled, both of Cade's men were disarmed and subdued. Pete was crying. Whether from pain or shame was unclear. "Tie them up," Jonah said. "We'll sort them out when—" Footsteps above, heavy, deliberate. Then Luther Cade's voice, muffled but clear. "I know you're down there. Pike, got men at both exits. Send up the widow and the papers, and maybe we let the family go." "Mrs." Morrison clutched her children tighter. Her husband, a clerk at the general store, looked ready to faint. "He's bluffing," Daniel said quietly. "Can't have more than 3 or 4 men still standing in this storm." "3 or 4's enough," Jonah replied. He looked at Mrs. Hart. "Your cellar, your call." She studied the frightened family, then Miss Whitlock clutching the portfolio, then Jonah. Something passed through her eyes, decision, resolution. "Mr. Morrison," she said calmly, "can you hold a gun?" I suppose." She handed him Pete's pistol. "Point it at the doors. Anyone but us comes down. You shoot, understand?" He nodded shakily. "The rest of you, stay here." She picked up her rifle. "Mr. Pike, Mr. Redbird, shall we—" Jonah wanted to argue, but the set of her jaw told him it would be useless. "What's the plan?" "The storm's dying. Cade's men will be half blind and separated." She moved toward the exterior cellar door. "We take them before they regroup." "That's not a plan. That's suicide." "No." Her smile was sharp as winter. "That's home advantage." They emerged into chaos. But she was right, the storm was weakening. Visibility had improved to maybe 20 feet. Mrs. Hart led them not toward the house, but to the stable. 3 horses huddled inside, including Jonah's mare. Mrs. Hart went straight to a corner, pulling away hay bales to reveal a hidden cache ammunition, 2 shotguns, and dynamite. Thomas was paranoid about claim jumpers, she explained. loading a shotgun. Sometimes paranoia pays. A shadow appeared in the stable entrance. Daniel's thrown knife dropped him silently. "That's one," Jonah said. They worked their way around the property's edge. Using outbuildings for cover, the storm continued to die, revealing the devastation, half the Morrison roof gone, Mrs. Hart's boarding house looking like it had been through a siege. Which it had. They found 2 more of Cade's men sheltering behind the overturned wagon. The shotgun in Mrs. Hart's hands spoke twice. Both men chose surrender over suicide. "Where's Cade?" Jonah demanded. One of them, blood streaming from pellet wounds, pointed toward Main Street. "Went to get Bain. Said if we couldn't smoke you out, he'd burn you out." Fire. In a wooden town, after a drought, that meant disaster. They left the wounded men tied and gagged, racing back toward the house. The remaining townsfolk were emerging as the storm cleared, staring at the damage. Sheriff Dawes appeared, looking haggard. "What in blazes?" "Cade's going to burn the town." Jonah cut him off. "You standing or running?" The sheriff's face went through several expressions before settling on shame. I'll get men." "Do it fast." They retrieved the others from the cellar. Miss Whitlock still had the documents, now supplemented by confessions from Pete Garrison, who'd broken completely under Mrs. Hart's maternal disappointment. "We need to get these papers out," Miss Whitlock said, before the church bell began ringing the town's fire alarm. Smoke rose from the direction of the livery stable. "Too late," Daniel said. But Mrs. Hart was already moving, organizing with the efficiency of a general. "Mr. Morrison, take your family to the church stone building, safest place. Miss Whitlock, can you ride?" "Yes, but—" "Take my horse and the documents. Ride for Fort Laramie. Don't stop." She turned to the gathered townspeople. "We need bucket brigades, everyone who can carry water. Move." The town, shaken from its stupor, responded. Even some who'd shunned Mrs. Hart came forward. Fire was everyone's enemy on the frontier as they fought the flames. Jonah spotted Cade across the street. The outlaw leader stood with Major Bain, watching the chaos with satisfaction. Bain looked exactly like what he was, a carrion bird in an expensive suit. Thin, sharp-featured, with eyes that calculated profit in everything. He said something to Cade, pointing toward the boarding house. "They're coming," Daniel warned. But before Cade could move, a new voice rang out, old but strong, carrying the authority of years. Leluther Cade Major Bain. Judge Fenimore Shaw stood in the middle of Main Street, ancient but unbowed. "Holding a legal document? I have here a federal warrant for your arrest. Major Bain on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and murder for hire." Bain's composure cracked. "You have no authority." "I have all the authority I need." The judge's eyes were steel. "Miss Whitlock reached me before the storm. The federal marshals are a day behind. You can surrender to me, or you can wait for them. Choose." Cade made the choice for him, going for his gun. 3 rifles spoke as one: Jonah, Daniel, and, surprisingly, Sheriff Dawes. Cade spun and fell, clutching his arm. "Anyone else?" the judge asked mildly. Bain's remaining men melted away like morning frost. The man himself stood alone, his empire crumbling in real time. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I have lawyers." "You have nothing," Judge Shaw corrected. "Your accounts are frozen, your deeds invalidated, your Confederates turning evidence. It's finished, Horace." As the sheriff, finding courage at last, led Bain away, Mrs. Hart appeared at Jonah's side, soot-stained and exhausted. She'd never looked stronger. "We held," she said simply. "We held," he agreed. The livery stable was lost, but they'd saved the rest. As the sun broke through the last of the dust, painting Bitter Creek in shades of gold, the town began the slow work of putting itself back together. But first, there was a boarding house to repair. And maybe, just maybe, something else to build from the ashes of this day. Mr. Pike. Mrs., Hart said formally, though her eyes held warmth. I believe your week's rent is up tomorrow. Will you be staying? Jonah looked at the damaged building, the traumatized town, the work ahead. Then he looked at the woman beside him, straight-backed, indomitable, magnificent. Ma'am, he said, I believe I might be staying quite a bit longer. Daniel, cleaning his knife, smiled. About time you stopped running, brother. In the distance, thunder rumbled one last time, but this time it sounded like promise rather than threat. The storm had passed. What came next was up to them. The federal marshals arrived at dawn 3 days later, their badges glinting in the early light like promises that might be kept or broken. Jonah watched from the boarding house porch as they rode in 4 men with the weathered look of those who'd chased justice through too many territories to believe in it completely. Mrs. Hart stood beside him, serving coffee to the workers who'd come to repair her roof. The town had rallied, guilt and gratitude mixing into action. Even Mrs. Pemberton from the church auxiliary had sent her husband to help, though she herself maintained a careful distance. Marshal Briggs. The lead rider introduced himself, dismounting with the careful movements of a man who'd spent too many years in the saddle. We're here about Major Bain. Judge Shaw has him locked up, Jonah said, though his lawyers arrived yesterday. Briggs spat tobacco juice into the street. Lawyers, they multiply like roaches. He looked at Mrs. Hart. You'd be the widow who helped expose this mess. I'm Mrs. Hart, yes. We'll need statements, documents, everything you have. Miss Whitlock has the originals. She rode for Fort Laramie to file them safely. Smart woman. Briggs accepted the coffee, Mrs. Hart offered. But Bain's lawyers are claiming those documents were obtained illegally. Breaking and entering, they say. I entered my own safety deposit box. Mrs. Hart said coldly. The one the bank refused me access to. Like I said, lawyers. Briggs turned to Jonah. Your Pike heard about you. Also heard Bain's people are claiming you're wanted for desertion. Jonah's jaw tightened. I served my time, discharged honorably. I believe you, but they're throwing everything at the wall, seeing what sticks. The marshal pulled out a folded paper. Which is why I'm carrying this, a federal warrant for your arrest. Mrs. Hart stepped forward. Now wait just a minute. Easy, ma'am. Briggs held up a hand. I said I'm carrying it. Didn't say I was serving it. See, funny thing about warrants, sometimes they get lost, damaged in transit, especially when the man they're for has been helping maintain order in a town under threat. He made a show of handling the paper carelessly, letting it fall into a puddle of spilled coffee. Oops, shame. Have to request a new one. Could take weeks. Daniel emerged from the stable, having heard the conversation. Federal bureaucracy, terribly inefficient. Exactly. Briggs grinned. Now, about those statements. They spent the morning going over everything Cade's threats, the attack, the storm battle. Other townspeople came forward, emboldened by federal presence. Tim Rook, the bank clerk, provided records showing Bain's systematic targeting of properties along the rail route. He wasn't just taking land, Tim explained, nervous but determined. He was positioning himself to control the entire economic corridor, the depot, the warehouses, even the water rights. Water rights. Briggs looked interested. The railroad needs water for the steam engines. Bain was buying up every spring and well for miles. Tim produced more documents. He planned to charge the railroad triple rates, maybe more. Extortion on top of murder. Briggs nodded. That's federal interest for sure. As they talked, Jonah noticed Mrs. Hart growing increasingly pale. When the marshals left to interview Judge Shaw, he found her in the kitchen, gripping the counter. What's wrong? Those lawyers Briggs mentioned. They were asking about Thomas. She met his eyes. About his debts, his character. They're going to drag his name through the mud to discredit me.
Let them try. The whole town saw what happened here.
The whole town whispered about me for 6 months. Her voice turned bitter. A widow running a boarding house, not quite respectable. Now they'll have more ammunition. Jonah wanted to comfort her, but wasn't sure how. They'd fought together, but in the quiet moments, he felt the distance between them years, experiences, griefs that couldn't be shared in words. A commotion outside interrupted. They found Marshal Briggs facing off with 3 men in city suits, Bain's lawyers. No doubt. No legal standing. One was saying, "Our client was arrested without proper warrant, held without bail. Your client is charged with conspiracy to commit murder." Judge Shaw interrupted, appearing with his usual impeccable timing. "Bail is at my discretion, and I find him a flight risk. This is persecution. Major Bain is a respected businessman. Who hired killers?" Sheriff Dawes said he'd found steady courage since the storm, as if shame had burned away his fear. "I've got 2 of Cade's men willing to testify." The lead lawyer pulled out a document. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain this a sworn affidavit from one Samuel Morrison stating that Mrs. Hart threatened his family during the recent unpleasantness." Jonah felt Mrs. Hart stiffen beside him. Sam Morrison, whose family she'd saved. "That's a lie," she said quietly. "Is it Mr. Morrison states you forced his family into a dangerous situation, used them as shields? She saved them." This from an unexpected source, Mrs. Morrison, pushing through the crowd with her children. "How dare you? How dare he?" She turned on the lawyers. "My husband took Bain's money to lie. Didn't he? How much? How much did it cost to buy his soul?" The lawyers retreated under her fury, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt was planted. That evening, Mrs. Hart sat in her damaged parlor, staring at nothing. Most of the volunteers had gone home. Only Jonah, Daniel, and Tim Rook remained, trying to shore up the front entrance. "They'll twist everything," she said. "Every kindness into calculation, every defensive act into aggression. Then we twist back," Daniel said. "I've been talking to people. The Morrison children told their schoolmates what really happened. Children don't lie as easily as their parents. And I've been through more of Bain's records," Tim added. "There's something else, something about your husband." "Mrs. Hart looked up sharply. Tim hesitated. "He was investigating Bain. Before he died, I found notes in Bain's files. They were watching him. Thomas never said anything. Maybe he was protecting you." Jonah set down his hammer. "Maybe that's why they killed him, not for refusing their deal, but for threatening to expose it." She stood abruptly. "I need air." Jonah found her on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie red. He stood beside her, not speaking. "I didn't know him," she said finally. "My own husband. I thought he was weak, giving in to drink and schemes. But maybe—" Her voice caught. "Maybe he was trying to be brave." "Bravery comes in different forms." She looked at him. "Is that why you stayed, bravery?" "Started that way. Reflex, maybe. Couldn't watch bullies threaten a good woman." "And now?" He met her gaze. "Now I figure there might be something here worth building, not just defending." Before she could respond, horses thundered into town. Not the marshals, these riders wore trail clothes and moved with purpose. They stopped at the jail. "Trouble," Daniel said, appearing beside them. They hurried to Main Street to find a standoff. The new riders, 6 of them, faced the jail where Marshal Briggs stood guard. "We're here for Luther Cade," their leader announced. "He's wanted in Colorado for murder. We aim to collect—" "Bounty hunters," Briggs spat. "Cade's in federal custody. Federal paper don't supersede a Colorado warrant. Hand him over." Like hell. Jonah saw the problem immediately. If Cade left federal custody, Bain's lawyers could claim the witness chain was broken, without Cade's testimony linking Bain to the violence. "They're Bain's men," he said quietly. "Has to be. Get Cade away. Probably kill him on the trail. Blame bandits." "Mrs." Hart stepped forward before anyone could stop her. "Gentlemen, I run the boarding house. You must be tired after your ride. I've got rooms, hot meals." The bounty hunter leader leered. "Well now, ain't you hospitable?" "It's what I do." Her smile was steel-wrapped in silk. "Of course. My house was recently damaged in an attack by the very man you're seeking. Perhaps you'd like to see the evidence bullet holes, blood stains. Might help your case in Colorado." The man hesitated, greed warring with caution. "Unless, Mrs." Hart continued, "you're not really interested in justice, unless someone paid you to come here and cause trouble." "Nobody paid us nothing." "Then you won't mind waiting while we verify your warrants. Send a telegraph to Colorado." She turned to Briggs. "Marshal, surely proper procedure." "Absolutely. Can't release a federal prisoner without verification. Take a day, maybe 2. The bounty hunters shifted restlessly. Their leader reached for his gun, then froze as he realized how many rifles were now pointed at him. The townspeople had quietly surrounded them. "Funny thing about threatening our town," Sheriff Dawes said. "We've gotten touchy about it lately." Faced with overwhelming force, the bounty hunters backed down. They made threats about returning, about legal action, but rode out without Cade. "That was brilliant," Tim breathed. "That was desperate," Mrs. Hart corrected. "They'll be back with the real warrants next time." "Then we'd better move fast." Marshal Briggs looked thoughtful. "Judge, how quickly can you convene a federal grand jury?" "With the circuit judge's approval, 3 days." "Do it. We'll put Bain on trial before his lawyers can manufacture more tricks." As the crowd dispersed, Jonah walked Mrs. Hart back to the boarding house. The sunset had faded to purple, first stars appearing. "You took a risk confronting those men," he said. "I'm tired of letting others fight my battles." She paused at her gate. "Bain's lawyers will come at me personally now. My reputation, my marriage, everything." "You don't have to face it alone." She studied him in the lamplight. "Why do you care what happens to me? Jonah Pike." He could have given her the easy answer duty, justice, doing what's right. Instead, he told the truth. "Because you remind me there's still something clean in this world. Something worth saving." He touched his hat. "Good night, Mrs. Hart." As he walked away, he heard her whisper, "Eliza, my name is Eliza." He smiled in the darkness. They had 3 days to prepare for trial. 3 days to gather evidence and testimonies. 3 days before Bain's money and influence came crashing down on them. But tonight, she'd trusted him with her name. That felt like a victory worth more than any courtroom triumph. Daniel was waiting at the stable. "The mayor wants to relocate the trial. Says the town can't handle more violence." "What do you think?" "I think running's become a habit for this town. Maybe it's time they stood still and fought." Jonah looked back at the boarding house, where lamplight glowed warm in the windows. "Maybe it's time we all did." Tomorrow would bring new challenges, lawyers and lies, threats and revelations. But tonight, Bitter Creek stood defiant under the stars, and a widow had found her voice. The rest would come as it would. They'd meet it standing up. The rain came on the second night, unusual for the season, falling soft and steady like a benediction. Jonah stood watch on the boarding house porch, rifle across his knees, listening to the drops patter on the new roof shingles. The town had pulled together in ways that surprised everyone, even Mrs. Pemberton had sent her best preserves, though she still wouldn't visit personally. Inside, Eliza Hart moved between tasks with her usual efficiency. But Jonah had learned to read the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands lingered on simple chores. Tomorrow the grand jury would convene. Tomorrow Bain's lawyers would drag her life into the light and twist it into something ugly. Coffee. She appeared beside him, 2 steaming cups in hand. Thanks. Their fingers brushed as he took the cup, and neither pulled away as quickly as they might have days ago. She settled onto the bench beside him, careful to maintain proper distance. Can't sleep either. Haven't slept sound in years. He sipped the coffee, strong and bitter. You make good coffee. Thomas always said it was too strong. She stared into the rain. I've been thinking about him, about what Tim found in those records. He was trying to protect you. Was he, or was he just trying to be important? Her voice carried old hurt. He always had schemes. Jonah, always the next big thing that would make us rich, make him matter. I thought investigating Bain was just another one. Maybe it was, but he stuck with it when it got dangerous. That counts. She pulled her shawl tighter. Does it? He's still dead? I'm still here facing his consequences. They sat in silence, watching the rain wash the street clean. Somewhere in town, a dog barked. Normal sounds of life continuing despite everything. I got a letter today, she said suddenly, from my sister in St. Louis, offering me a place if I want to leave. Jonah's chest tightened. You considering it? Shouldn't I start fresh somewhere they don't whisper about the widow heart? Running doesn't stop whispers, just changes their tune. She turned to study him, speaking from experience. Fort Laramie wasn't my first mistake, just my last. He set down his cup. Been running since the war ended, town to town, job to job, trying to find somewhere the ghosts couldn't follow. Did you? No, they're portable. Ghosts, pack light, travel easy. He met her eyes. But standing still here, facing them down, that's the first piece I've found. She looked away, but not before he caught the shine in her eyes. I'm scared. Jonah. I know. They'll ask about my marriage, about why a decent woman stayed with a man like Thomas. They'll make me sound... She stopped, unable to voice it. Like a human being who made choices, who stayed loyal even when it hurt. He shifted closer, still not touching but offering presence. That's not shameful. Eliza, that's strong. Mrs. Caldwell, the banker's wife, she told me today I should consider Bain's final offer. Sell the boarding house, take the money, leave quietly. Said it would be best for everyone. What did you tell her? A small smile touched her lips. I told her to get off my porch. That's my girl. The words slipped out before he could stop them. They hung in the air like the rain, soft but undeniable. She didn't correct him. A rider appeared through the rain. Daniel, returning from patrol, he swung down, water streaming from his hat. Trouble? Jonah asked. Maybe. Found tracks north of town. 8, 10 horses. Could be bounty hunters circling back. Could be Bain's buying more guns. Could be. Daniel accepted the coffee Eliza offered. Also could be nothing. Rain's washing out the sign. They discussed defense plans, but Jonah noticed Eliza growing quieter. Finally, she stood. I should try to sleep. Tomorrow we tell the truth. Jonah said, That's all. She paused at the door. Stay close tomorrow during the testimony. Try and stop me. After she went inside, Daniel settled beside Jonah. You're falling for her. Already fell. She's got enough weight to carry without adding my feeling. Daniel snorted. White men, always making simple things complicated. How's it simple? Woman needs strength. You offer it. You need softness. She provides it. Everything else is just fear talking. When did you get wise about women? Always been wise. You just never listened. Daniel stood. I'll take the back. You watch the front. And Jonah stopped thinking so much. The night deepened. Rain steady on the roof. Jonah made rounds, checking windows and doors. In the kitchen, he found evidence of Eliza's sleeplessness, bread dough rising for tomorrow. Enough to feed half the town. He was returning to the porch when he heard its soft crying from the parlor. He found her there, Thomas's mandolin in her lap, shoulders shaking. "Eliza." She looked up, face wet with tears. "I'm sorry. I was trying to be quiet." "Don't apologize." He sat beside her. Propriety be damned. "What is it?" "This." She held up the mandolin. "He played so beautifully, even drunk, even when I was furious with him. He could make music that—" She traced the broken strings. "I keep thinking if I could fix it, somehow that would fix everything else." "May I?" He took the instrument, examining the damage. Daniel knows woodworking, learned from his grandfather. He could help repair this. "Why would he do that?" "Because it matters to you. Because beautiful things shouldn't stay broken." She leaned against him then, just for a moment, her head on his shoulder. He held still, afraid to break the spell. "I haven't cried since the funeral," she whispered. "Couldn't afford to. Had to be strong, had to keep the business running, had to pretend I didn't hear the whispers." "You don't have to pretend now." "Don't I? Tomorrow they'll all be watching. The whole town, judging the widow Hart. Did she drive him to drink? Did she know about his schemes? Was she complicit, or just fool enough to love a weak man?" "You loved him. That's not foolish." She pulled back to look at him. "I did love him. Once, before the disappointments piled up like cordwood. Is that what they want to hear, that I stayed out of duty? Not love, that I was relieved when he died." "Were you?" The question hung between them. "Finally," she answered. "God help me. Part of me was free of the debts, the schemes, the apologies that never meant anything. What kind of woman does that make me?" "An honest one." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the rain intensified. Somewhere in the house, a shutter banged. "His hands trembled when he played," she said suddenly. "Near the end, from the drinking, but also from fear. I think he knew Bane was dangerous." She touched the mandolin strings. "The night before he died, he played for hours, old songs from when we were courting. I pretended to be asleep, but I listened. It was like he was saying goodbye. Maybe he was. He tried to tell me something that morning, kept starting sentences and stopping. Finally, he just kissed my forehead and left." Fresh tears came. "I didn't even say goodbye properly. I was angry about a bill from the mercantile." Jonah pulled out his handkerchief, worn but clean. She took it gratefully. "Want to know something strange?" she continued. "When they brought his body back, his hands were clean. Thomas never had clean hands, always stained with ink or tobacco. But they were clean. Someone had washed them." Daniel might could track from where it happened, even after all this time. "Would it matter he's still dead? Bane still wants my land. The town still whispers. Truth always matters, even when it comes late." She wiped her eyes, composing herself. "I must look a fright." "You look like a woman who's carried too much alone." Their eyes met and held. The space between them hummed with possibility. She leaned toward him, lips parting. The front door burst open. Tim Rook stumbled in, soaked and panicked. "They're burning the courthouse. Bane's men, they're burning the courthouse." They raced into the rain to find orange light flickering against the clouds. The courthouse where the trial was to be held was fully engulfed. Bucket brigades were already forming, but it was clearly too late. Judge Shaw stood in the street, nightshirt soaked, watching his life's work burn. 40 years of records, he said numbly. Birth certificates, death records, property deeds. "The trial evidence?" Jonah asked. "Safe. I moved it to the bank vault yesterday, but without a courthouse. We'll use the church," Eliza said firmly. "Biggest building left. Reverend Morse won't like it, but justice is godly work." Marshal Briggs appeared, soot-stained and grim. "Found the fire setters. 2 men, both dead. Shot in the back after they lit the blaze." "Bane covering tracks," Daniel said. "Can't prove it. Men had no identification, no connection we can find." Briggs spat.
He's getting desperate.
Or confident, Jonah countered. Burning the courthouse sends a message he can reach anywhere. They worked through the night, saving what they could. By dawn, the courthouse was a smoking ruin, but the town's spirit seemed oddly stronger. The attack had backfired instead of cowering. People were angry. As the sun rose, Eliza stood with Jonah looking at the damage. Her dress was ruined, face smudged with soot, hair escaping its pins. She'd never looked more beautiful to him. "Still scared?" he asked. "Terrified." She squared her shoulders. "But also furious. How dare they? How dare he think he can burn away justice?" "That's the spirit we need in court." She touched his arm. "What I said last night, about being relieved, you said what you felt, no shame in truth. The lawyers will use it. Let them. Truth's still better than their lies." Reverend Morse appeared, thin-lipped with disapproval. "Mrs. Hart, Marshal Briggs says you want to use the church for temporal proceedings." "For justice. Reverend, surely God approves of justice." "God's house is not a courtroom." "Then where would you have us meet the saloon, the street?" Her voice sharpened. "Or would you prefer we just surrender to the men who burned our courthouse?" The Reverend flushed. "I'll need to pray on it." "Pray fast. Court convenes at 9. As the Reverend retreated, Jonah smiled. "You've got steel in you. Eliza Hart." Thomas used to say that, usually when I wouldn't bend to his schemes. She looked at the boarding house, still standing despite everything. "I need to change. Can't testify looking like a chimney sweep." "Eliza," he caught her hand. "Whatever happens in there, whatever they ask or imply, remember you're not alone. Not anymore." She squeezed his fingers, then pulled away. "I have to be alone in that witness chair." "But I'll be right there. First row. Anyone wants to judge you. They'll have to look past me to do it. My guardian gunslinger." It was meant to be light, but her voice caught. "Jonah, if this goes bad..." "It won't." "But if it does, if Bain wins, if I have to run..." He stepped close, propriety forgotten in the morning light. "Then I'll run with you, if that's what you want." Her answer was in her eyes, but Tim Rook's shout interrupted. "Judge says court in 1 hour, church or nowhere." The moment broke. Eliza hurried inside to prepare. Jonah checked his weapons and tried not to think about how much could go wrong in the next few hours. Daniel appeared with the repaired mandolin, strings replaced, wood polished. "For after," he said simply. "Everyone needs something to hope for after." Jonah took the instrument carefully. After, if they survived the trial, if truth outweighed money, if a widow's courage could stand against an empire of corruption. Too many ifs. But as he watched Eliza through the window, chin high despite everything, he thought maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The rain had washed the streets clean. Now they'd see if it could do the same for justice. The entrance to Widow's Arch looked like a gateway to another world. Red rock walls rising sheer on either side. The passage barely wide enough for 2 riders abreast. Daniel crouched beside Jonah in the scrub brush, studying the terrain with the patience of a man who'd learned that hurrying got you killed. "Cade's smart," Daniel murmured. "One way in, one way out. They'll have shooters on the rim." Jonah squinted up at the canyon walls. "How many did the Morrison boys say?" 8, maybe 9, plus Cade." Daniel's expression darkened. "They've got Tommy Brennan, the blacksmith's son. Kid's only 12. The kidnapping had happened during the chaos of the courthouse fire, a distraction within a distraction. By the time anyone noticed Tommy missing, Cade's message had already been nailed to the smithy door. The boy for Pike and the widow. Noon at Widow's Arch. Come alone or he dies. Of course they hadn't come alone. Half the town had saddled up, fear finally transforming into fury. Even Reverend Morse had strapped on an ancient colt, muttering about righteous anger. Eliza sat her horse like she'd been born to it, Springfield across her saddle, jaw set with determination. She'd changed into a split riding skirt and her late husband's jacket, practical clothes for killing work. "I see movement," May Whitlock called softly. She'd returned from Fort Laramie just in time for this final confrontation, bringing federal reinforcements that were still hours away. North Rim, about 40 yards in. Sheriff Dawes crawled up beside them, sweating despite the morning cool. "We could try negotiating." "With Luther Cade." Jonah shook his head. "He's past negotiating. This ends one way." "Then we'd better be smart about it." Eliza had moved up to join them, studying the canyon with calculating eyes. The wind's blowing east to west through the arch, strong enough to carry sound. "And gun smoke," Daniel added, understanding immediately. "Make it hard for those rim shooters to spot targets." "We'll need a distraction," Jonah said. "Something to pull their attention." "I'll do it." Tim Rook appeared. No longer the nervous bank clerk, but a man who'd found his spine. "I'll ride in, try to negotiate, while they're focused on me." "That's suicide, boy," Sheriff Dawes protested. "Maybe, but Tommy Brennan's my nephew, my sister's boy." Tim's young face was resolute. "I'm done being scared." They spent precious minutes planning, knowing Cade's patience was wearing thin. The town volunteers were divided into 3 groups, one to create a diversion at the eastern approach, one to scale the treacherous back trail Daniel had scouted, and the main force to push through once the rim shooters were neutralized. "Remember," Jonah addressed the gathered townspeople, "Cade's men are killers, but they're also cowards. They're used to victims who don't fight back. Show them different, and they'll break." As they prepared to move out, Eliza caught his arm. "Jonah, if something happens—" "Nothing's happening to you, I promised." "I'm not worried about me." Her green eyes held his. "Just be careful. I've lost enough to Luther Cade." He wanted to kiss her, propriety be damned, but settled for squeezing her hand. "After this is over." "After," she agreed. "We'll have time for after." Tim Rook rode in at 11:40, white flag tied to his rifle barrel. From their position, Jonah could see him enter the canyon, could hear his voice echoing off the walls, though not the words. "Wait for it," Daniel whispered. A rifle cracked from the rim. Tim's horse reared as a bullet kicked up dust at its feet. Warning shot. "That's our cue." Daniel melted into the brush, leading his climbers up the back trail. Jonah watched the rim, counting muzzle flashes as more warning shots rang out. 5 shooters visible, which meant 3 or 4 still hidden, and Cade himself would be with the boy, using him as a shield. Tim had dismounted now, hands raised, still talking. Jonah could see his nephew's welfare genuinely animated him. His gestures were passionate, pleading. It was buying them time. 20 minutes crawled by. Then Daniel's signal, a mirror flash from the rim. They'd reached position. Now, Jonah commanded. The eastern diversion began volunteers firing into the canyon from cover, their shots echoing and re-echoing off the walls. As predicted, the rim shooters turned that direction, trying to spot targets through the gun smoke whipping past on the wind. That's when Daniel struck. The first rim shooter simply vanished, pulled backward out of sight. The second managed a strangled yell before following. Panic spread along the rim as Cade's men realized they were no longer the hunters. "Main force, advance!" Jonah spurred his horse forward, Eliza and the others thundering behind. They entered the canyon at full gallop, the narrow walls amplifying the sound into thunder. Tim dove aside as they charged past. Ahead, Jonah could see Cade's main position, a cluster of wagons and rocks where the canyon briefly widened. Cade himself stood behind an overturned wagon, one arm around Tommy Brennan's throat, pistol pressed to the boy's temple. "That's far enough. Pike!" Cade's scarred face was twisted with rage. "Another step and the boy." Eliza's Springfield boomed. The wagon wheel beside Cade's head exploded in splinters. He flinched, his grip loosening for just an instant. It was enough. Tommy bit down hard on Cade's arm and twisted free, running toward the rescuers. Cade raised his pistol toward the fleeing boy. 3 guns fired as one. Jonah's, Eliza's, and surprisingly, Sheriff Dawes's. Cade spun and fell, his shot going wild. His remaining men, seeing their leader down, threw out their weapons. The feared Luther Cade gang, terror of the territory, surrendered to a mob of shopkeepers and housewives. But Cade wasn't finished. As Jonah dismounted to secure him, the outlaw rolled, a hidden derringer sliding from his sleeve. Time slowed. Jonah saw his own death in that small black barrel. Then Eliza was there, rifle stock swinging. The derringer flew from Cade's hand as the wood connected with his wrist. He howled, clutching the broken bone. "That's for Thomas, you bastard," she said quietly. They secured the survivors, Daniel's team bringing down the rim shooters they'd captured. Tommy Brennan was bruised but unbroken, running to his mother's arms as she pushed through the crowd. May Whitlock appeared at Jonah's shoulder. "Well done, though I suspect there's more to come." She was right. As they escorted the prisoners back toward town, a dust cloud on the horizon resolved into riders. Many riders. Bain's reinforcements, someone said nervously. But as the riders drew closer, Jonah recognized the lead figure, Marshal Briggs, with a full company of federal cavalry behind him.
"Sorry we're late,"
Briggs called.
"Train broke down. Heard you might need help."
"We managed," Jonah replied, indicating the captured outlaws. "So I see." Briggs studied the prisoners, then smiled grimly. "Luther Cade, been wanting to meet you. Got some nice federal charges waiting: mail robbery, interstate trafficking. You'll love Leavenworth Prison." As they entered town, word spread quickly. People emerged from buildings, cheering as the captured gang was marched to what remained of the jail. Tommy Brennan was passed from arm to arm, everyone wanting to assure themselves he was truly safe. But the victory felt incomplete. Cade was captured, but Bain remained free, his lawyers still circling like vultures. "It's not over," Eliza said quietly, riding beside Jonah. "No, but we've cut off his right hand, hard to intimidate without muscle." They reached the boarding house to find Judge Shaw waiting on the porch, a telegram in his hand. "From the federal prosecutor in Denver," he announced. "Given the attack on the courthouse and attempted murder of a federal witness, that's you, Mrs. Hart, they're taking over the case. Bain will be tried in federal court." "Where his money counts for less," May added with satisfaction. As the crowd dispersed, Jonah found himself alone with Eliza on the porch. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him aware of every ache and pain. "You saved my life," he said simply. "You saved mine first, several times." She leaned her rifle against the wall. "I believe that makes us even." "Does it?" He stepped closer. "Because I'm thinking we might be tied together by more than mutual life-saving." She met his gaze steadily. "What are you saying, Jonah Pike?" "I'm saying that after this is over, truly over, with Bain in prison and your land safe, I'd like to court you proper. If you'll have me." "Court me?" A smile tugged at her lips. "Like with flowers and Sunday dinners. If that's what you want, though knowing you, you'd probably prefer ammunition and coffee." She laughed, the sound bright as morning after all the darkness. "I might at that." Sheriff Dawes interrupted, looking sheepish but determined. "Mrs. Hart, Mr. Pike, wanted to apologize for not standing up sooner, for letting fear rule me." "You stood when it counted," Eliza said graciously. "Still," he straightened his badge, "things are going to be different now. This town's going to be different." As he walked away, Jonah noticed other changes already beginning. The Morrison children were playing in the street, their laughter no longer muted by fear. Neighbors who'd hidden behind curtains now talked openly on corners. Even Mrs. Pemberton nodded respectfully to Eliza as she passed. Widow's Arch, Eliza mused. They say it got its name from an Apache woman who waited there for her warrior husband to return from battle. Did he? No, but she waited anyway, until she turned to stone. That's what formed the arch her faithful heart. She looked at him. I won't be that kind of widow anymore, waiting for something that's already gone. What will you be instead? I don't know yet, but I think... She touched his hand. I think I'd like to find out with you. Daniel appeared from the stable, the repaired mandolin in his hands. Thought you might want this. Music helps heal after battle. Eliza took it reverently, running her fingers over the restored wood. It's beautiful. Thank you. She tuned it carefully, then began to play not one of Thomas's old songs, but something new, a melody that spoke of hard-won victory and hope carefully rebuilt. As the notes drifted over the town, Jonah felt something ease in his chest. They'd won this battle, though the war with Bane wasn't over. But standing here, listening to Eliza play while the sun set over Bitter Creek, he thought maybe they'd already won the things that mattered most. Trust, community, the courage to stand up. And perhaps, if he was lucky, love strong enough to weather whatever storms came next. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight there was music and peace and the woman he'd come to love making both seem possible. Play another, he said softly. Play something we can build on. She smiled and obliged, and Bitter Creek settled into evening with the sound of renewed hope echoing off its walls. The sun hung low over Main Street, painting long shadows across the dirt as Major Horace Bane stepped out of the bank. He moved with the calculated grace of a man who'd never doubted his own importance, his black suit pristine despite the dust that coated everything else in Bitter Creek. Word of Cade's capture had reached him, but his thin face showed no concern, merely the mild irritation of a chess player whose pawn had been taken. Jonah watched from the boarding house porch as Bane made his way toward them, flanked by two men who moved like professional soldiers. Behind them, keeping careful distance, Marshal Briggs and 3 federal deputies followed. Quite the welcoming committee, Bane said, stopping at the gate. His voice was cultured, Eastern educated, cold as January steel. Mrs. Hart, Mr. Pike, I believe congratulations are in order. State your business, Eliza said flatly. Direct, I appreciate that in a woman. Bane's smile was razor thin. I've come to make you a final offer, despite recent unpleasantness. I remain interested in purchasing your property. Not for sale. Everything is for sale, Mrs. Hart. The only question is price. He produced a bank draft from his vest. $50,000. Cash. More money than you'll see in a lifetime. Jonah whistled low. That was indeed a fortune enough to buy half the town. You could start fresh anywhere, Bane continued. San Francisco, Denver, even back east, if you prefer civilization to this. He gestured dismissively at the town. Collection of hovels. My answer remains no. Bane's eyes hardened. You're being foolish. Without Cade, I'll simply hire others. The railroad is coming, Mrs. Hart. Progress doesn't stop for sentiment. Neither does justice, May Whitlock said, appearing from inside. Major Bane, I have here a federal warrant for your arrest. For the first time, Bane's composure cracked. On what charges? Conspiracy, fraud, bribery of federal officials, and murder for hire. May smiled pleasantly. Shall I continue? The list is quite extensive. This is ridiculous. I'm a legitimate businessman. Who just tried to bribe a federal witness? Marshal Briggs noted. That's another charge. Miss Whitlock. Bane's men shifted, hands moving toward weapons. The federal deputies tensed in response. Gentlemen, Judge Shaw emerged from the crowd that had gathered. I'd advise against any rash actions. The town has had quite enough violence. Listen to the judge, Jonah said quietly, hand resting on his Colt. Your boss is finished. Don't die for his pride. The moment stretched taut as wire. Then Bain laughed a sound like breaking glass. You think you've won? I own judges, senators, railroad commissioners. This warrant isn't worth the paper it's written on. Perhaps, but this might interest you more. May produced another document, a signed confession from Luther Cade, detailing your arrangement, including the murder of Thomas Hart. Now Bain went very still. He was quite talkative once he realized federal prison was preferable to hanging. May continued. Named dates, amounts, even where you met to plan Thomas Hart's death. The Olympus Hotel in Denver, room 12. Wasn't it? Cade is a criminal. His word means nothing. By itself, perhaps, but combined with bank records, witness testimonies, and this. She pulled out a small leather journal. Thomas Hart's own notes. He was quite thorough in documenting your attempts to buy his land, and his refusal. Where did you? Bain stopped himself. Your office safe wasn't as secure as you thought, Daniel said, materializing from the crowd. Interesting what a man keeps when he thinks he's untouchable. Bain's face had gone pale, but his voice remained steady. You broke into my office. Any evidence obtained? Was retrieved under federal warrant. Marshal Briggs interrupted. All perfectly legal, unlike your activities. The crowd pressed closer, faces hard with anger. These were people who'd lived in fear of Bain's power, who'd watched him twist law and decency to his will. Now they smelled blood. You killed Thomas Hart, someone called out. Burned our courthouse. Tried to steal widow's land. Enough. Sheriff Dawes stepped forward, badge gleaming. This is a legal matter now. Major Bain, I'm placing you under arrest. Bain's response was unexpected. He smiled, a genuine expression this time, though cold as winter moonlight. Sheriff Dawes, how much courage you've found recently? Very well. He raised his hand slowly, but his eyes found Jonah. Mr. Pike, you seem like a man who appreciates history. Are you familiar with the code duello? Jonah's jaw tightened. Dueling's been outlawed for 20 years. In civilized places, perhaps, but this is the frontier. A man's honor still means something here. Bain's voice rose, carrying to the crowd. I've been accused of terrible crimes. My honor has been impugned. Under the ancient code, I have the right to demand satisfaction. You can't be serious, May protested. Quite serious, mister. Pike has been instrumental in destroying my reputation. I challenge him to single combat, unless... His smile widened. He's the coward, some say, a man who hides behind women and lawmen. The crowd murmured. Dueling might be illegal, but the code of honor still held weight in frontier towns. To refuse a direct challenge. Don't be a fool, Eliza said sharply. He's trying to escape justice. Am I? Bain addressed the crowd. I offer to face the man who's accused me. If I fall, I'm guilty. If he falls, perhaps these accusations deserve more scrutiny. That's not how law works, Judge Shaw said firmly. But it's how honor works, Bain countered. What say you, Pike? Or shall everyone know you as a coward who sends women to fight his battles? Jonah felt the trap closing. Refuse, and Bain would use it to undermine everything they'd built. Except, and he'd be playing Bain's game. Terms, he heard himself say. Jonah, no, Eliza gripped his arm. Traditional rules. Tomorrow at dawn. Choice of weapons to the challenged, that's you. Sabers or pistols. Bain's eyes glittered. I should mention I was cavalry trained at West Point, best swordsman in my class. Now Jonah understood. Bain expected him to choose pistols, the obvious choice for a gunfighter. But Bain would have planned for that. Have some trick ready, choose sabers, and face a trained swordsman. I need an answer. Pike! Jonah looked at Eliza, saw the fear in her eyes. Then at the crowd, waiting to see if their champion would stand. "Sabers," he said quietly. "Dawn tomorrow." Surprise flickered across Bane's face before he masked it.
Excellent. Until tomorrow, then.
As the marshals led him away, Eliza turned on Jonah. "Have you lost your mind? He'll kill you." "Maybe." "Maybe, Jonah. You're a gunfighter, not a swordsman." "I know." He met her furious gaze. "But I also know men like Bane. He'll have something planned for pistols. Some edge. This way. I might surprise him." "By dying with a sword in your chest." Daniel stepped forward. "Actually, Jonah trained with cavalry sabers, part of standard service. 20 years ago." Eliza's voice rose. "Against a man who just said he was the best at West Point." "Then I'd better practice." Jonah touched her shoulder gently. "Trust me." "Trust you? You just agreed to throw your life away for pride."
No, I agreed to end this properly.
He looked around at the gathering crowd.
Bane's right about one thing. Honor still matters here. If I'd refused, he'd use it to poison everything we've done. This way, win or lose, it's finished.
May Whitlock pushed through the crowd. "This is insane. I'll have it stopped." "On what grounds?" Judge Shaw asked wearily. "Mutual combat between consenting parties. No jury in the territory would convict." "Then
We'll prepare."
Daniel interrupted. "Come on, brother. Let's see if your sword arm remembers." They spent the evening in the stable, Daniel producing a pair of cavalry sabers from somewhere. Jonah's arms remembered the weight, the balance, but his movements were rusty, slow.
"He'll come fast,"
Daniel instructed, acting as opponent.
"West Point style is aggressive. Use that against him."
They worked until full dark, sweat soaking through Jonah's shirt despite the cool air. His muscles screamed protests, but gradually the old patterns returned. Eliza appeared with food and water, watching silently as they practiced. When Daniel stepped away to check the perimeter, she approached. "I could shoot him," she said quietly. "During the duel. Make it look like—" "No." Jonah caught her hands. "That's not who you are."
"Isn't it I've shot men before, to protect what matters?"
"This is different. This is murder. This is survival." Tears tracked down her cheeks. "I can't lose you too. Not now. Not when—" "When what?" "When I've just found you." The words came out in a rush. "When I've just started to believe I could have something good again." He pulled her close, propriety forgotten. She pressed against him, trembling. "I'll be careful," he promised. "Careful won't help against a trained swordsman." "Then I'll be lucky." She pulled back to glare at him. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." He cupped her face gently. "Sometimes lucky is all we have. Lucky I came to your boarding house. Lucky you didn't throw me out. Lucky we found each other in all this mess."
"Jonah!"
He kissed her then, soft and sure, tasting tears and determination. She returned it fiercely, like she could pour all her fear and hope into this moment. When they parted, her eyes were bright. "Come back to me. Always." Dawn came too soon, painting the sky the color of blood. The town gathered at the old corral east of Main Street, forming a rough circle. Bane waited in the center, coat removed, sword gleaming in the early light. He'd changed overnight, the businessman's soft edges replaced by a soldier's bearing. He moved through practice forms with liquid grace, the saber an extension of his arm. "Having second thoughts," he called as Jonah approached. "Just admiring the demonstration?" Jonah shrugged off his own coat, testing his sword's weight. "Impressive. Very West Point. Mock all you like. In minutes, you'll be dead. And this town will remember that challenging Horace Bane has consequences." Judge Shaw stepped between them. "Gentlemen, the rules are simple. First blood or death. You may yield at any time." He looked between them sadly. "I urge you both to reconsider." Begin, Bane said coldly. They circled, measuring each other. Bane moved like a cat, balanced and predatory. Jonah felt clumsy by comparison, his footwork uncertain. Bane attacked without warning, saber flashing in a complex pattern. Jonah barely got his blade up in time, the clash of steel ringing across the morning air. The force drove him back, defensive already. Pathetic, Bane sneered, pressing his advantage. Is this the man who defeated Luther Cade? Another flurry of attacks, each more aggressive than the last. Jonah gave ground steadily, his parries growing desperate. The crowd murmured uneasily. Then Jonah spotted a slight hesitation when Bane drew back for a thrust, a moment where he admired his own form. West Point perfect, but predictable. The next attack came high. Instead of parrying, Jonah dropped low, blade sweeping for Bane's legs. The Major leaped back, startled, his rhythm broken. Cavalry tricks, Bane spat. No proper form. I'm not here to be proper. Jonah pressed forward, using what Daniel had reminded him. Frontier fighting was dirty, practical. I'm here to win. They engaged again, but now Jonah mixed trained moves with pure instinct. When Bane expected a classic riposte, Jonah gave him a boot to the knee. When proper distance called for retreat, Jonah bulled forward, using his weight. Bane's frustration grew visible. This wasn't the civilized duel he'd trained for. This was a brawl with sharp edges. Stand and fight properly, he snarled, executing a perfect lunge. Jonah sidestepped, grabbed Bane's extended wrist, and brought his knee up hard. Bone cracked. Bane's saber flew from nerveless fingers. Before the Major could react, Jonah's blade was at his throat. Yield, Jonah said quietly. Bane's eyes blazed with hatred. His left hand moved. Gun, someone screamed. Jonah saw the derringer sliding from Bane's sleeve, saw death in the black barrel. Time slowed. The crack of a rifle split the morning. Bane's hand exploded in red, the hidden gun spinning away. He fell to his knees, screaming. Eliza stood at the crowd's edge, smoking Springfield steady in her hands. That's twice you've saved me, Jonah said. I'm establishing a pattern. Her voice was rock steady. Besides, he cheated first. Marshal Briggs pushed forward, examining Bane's shattered hand. Hidden gun in a duel. That's attempted murder on top of everything else. He nodded to his deputies. Take him. Get the doctor for that hand. As they dragged Bane away, he locked eyes with Jonah one last time. This isn't over. I have resources you can't imagine. I'll be back. No, Judge Shaw said firmly. You won't. Federal prison. Major Bane. For a very, very long time. The crowd dispersed slowly, the anticlimax leaving them uncertain. Justice had been served, but messily, incompletely. Jonah found Eliza standing alone, rifle still in her hands. Thank you. Don't thank me. Don't you ever thank me for having to save your prideful hide. She glared at him. You knew he'd cheat. Suspected. Men like Bane always have an edge. He touched her cheek gently. But I also knew I had my own edge. You. That's not funny either. Still not joking. He took the rifle, setting it aside. Eliza Hart, you are the finest woman I've ever known. Brave, strong, and a hell of a shot. Any man would be lucky to have you watching his back. Just his back? Well, no. The front's nice, too. And the sides, pretty much all of you. Really? Despite everything? She laughed. You're impossible. Probably. But I'm also alive, thanks to you. He grew serious. This is finished now. Bane's done. Cade's done. You're safe. Your land is safe. So what happens now? Now, he looked at the rising sun, painting Bitter Creek in shades of gold and possibility. Now we build something. Together. If you'll have me. I suppose you'll be wanting that courtship flowers and Sunday dinners. Actually, I was thinking we might skip straight to the wedding. Unless you object to marrying a man who can't even win a proper duel. She pretended to consider. I suppose I could overlook that failing, given your other qualities. Such as, you're moderately handsome, reasonably brave, and you make excellent coffee. High praise indeed. She grew serious, studying his face. Are you sure, Jonah? I'm a widow with a bullet-scarred boarding house and a reputation for shooting men who annoy me. Sounds perfect to me. Then yes. She smiled, bright as the morning. Yes, I'll marry you. He kissed her there in the dusty street, not caring who saw. Around them, Bitter Creek stirred to life, hammers ringing as rebuilding continued. Voices calling greetings, the ordinary business of living resuming. It wasn't a perfect ending. Bain's trial would be long and complex. The railroad would still come, bringing change both good and ill. The boarding house needed massive repairs. But standing there with Eliza in his arms, Jonah thought it was ending enough. They'd fought for this chance at happiness, bled for it, nearly died for it. Now all they had to do was live it. 6 months later, the morning sun caught the new glass windows of Hart's boarding house, though folks had started calling it the Pike House since the wedding. Jonah stood on the rebuilt porch, coffee in hand, watching the construction crews lay track for the railroad spur. Progress had come to Bitter Creek, inevitable as sunrise, but on the town's own terms. You're up early, Eliza said, joining him. She wore a simple calico dress, her hair still loose from sleep, and Jonah thought she'd never looked more beautiful. Wanted to see them reach the depot site. He nodded toward the workers. Tim Rook says the first train should arrive next month. Tim Rook says a lot of things these days. She smiled. Who'd have thought that nervous bank clerk would become mayor? Same person who'd have thought Sheriff Dawes would become a federal marshal, I suppose. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their town transform. The new courthouse built of brick this time dominated Main Street. The Morrison family's general store had expanded, and Doc Holcomb had taken on a younger partner fresh from medical school, even Mrs. Pemberton had softened, bringing her famous apple preserves to the boarding house just yesterday. A letter came from May, Eliza said, producing an envelope. From Denver. Jonah read quickly, then smiled. Bain got 20 years. Cade got life, and May's been promoted chief investigator for the Territorial Commission. She says there's another position open, asks if you're interested. Are you trying to get rid of me already? Never. She leaned against him. But I know you sometimes miss it. The action, the purpose. I have purpose. He set down the letter. Right here, though I'll admit, teaching the town boys to shoot straight isn't quite the same thrill as facing down outlaws. Speaking of which, your class is in an hour, and you promised Emma Morrison you'd teach her too. Did I? She's very insistent. Says if boys can learn to defend the town, so can girls. Smart kid. Gets it from her mother. He paused. Though her father's doing better. Shame does that sometimes makes a man want to prove he's changed. Sam Morrison apologized again yesterday, 4th time this month. You forgive him. I'm working on it, she sighed. Forgiveness is harder than fighting sometimes. Daniel emerged from the stable, leading his horse. He'd stayed on after the trial, helping rebuild and serving as an unofficial deputy. Now he was headed back to his people for the winter. Wanted to say goodbye proper, he said, clasping Jonah's hand. I'll be back come spring. Someone needs to make sure you don't go soft. Soft, I'll have you know I split 2 cords of wood yesterday. Like I said, soft. Daniel grinned, then grew serious. Take care of each other. What you've built here, it's rare. After he rode off, Eliza and Jonah walked through town. The morning was crisp. autumn painting the cottonwoods gold along the creek. They stopped at the cemetery, where Thomas Hart's grave stood newly tended. Eliza had planted wildflowers that bloomed despite the season. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, "about what you said once, that we can't change the past, only what we do with it." "Wise words. Wonder who said them." She smiled sadly. "Thomas wasn't a bad man, just weak, lost. I think he'd be glad the boarding house survived, that something good came from all the pain." "I think you're right." They continued to the new school, where Reverend Morse was attempting to wrangle 24 children of various ages. The Reverend had found unexpected purpose in education after the violence ended, as if teaching the next generation might atone for his earlier cowardice. Mrs. Pike. Tommy Brennan ran up, fully recovered from his ordeal. "Is it true, Mr. Pike is teaching us to shoot today?" "Gun safety," Jonah corrected. "Big difference, and not until you're all 12 or older." "Ah, but I'm almost 12. "Almost isn't the same as is young man," Eliza said firmly. "Now get back to your lessons." They watched the boy run off, full of life and mischief. "He's doing well," Jonah observed, "considering what he went through. Children are resilient. It's adults who carry things forever." She touched his arm. "Speaking of which, you had another nightmare last night." "Did I wake you?" "No, but I felt you tense up. Fort Laramie again." He nodded. "Less often now, though having something good to wake up to helps." They completed their circuit at the depot construction site. The wooden frame was rising quickly, soon to be Bitter Creek's connection to the wider world. For better or worse, isolation was ending. Mr. Pike, Mrs. Pike. A young man in a railroad company vest hurried over. "I'm James Prescott, the new station agent. Wanted to introduce myself and ask about lodging." "We have rooms," Eliza said, slipping naturally into business mode. $2 a week, includes breakfast and supper. No drinking in the rooms. No visitors after 9. "Yes, ma'am. Heard about your rules. Also heard you serve the best food in the territory." "Flattery will get you fresh biscuits. Mr. Prescott, come by this afternoon and I'll show you the rooms." As the young man hurried off, Jonah chuckled. "Already drumming up business? The railroad will bring more travelers. We'll need to hire help soon." She gave him a sideways look. "Maybe a couple of those saloon girls looking for respectable work." "Your house, your rules." "Our house," she corrected. "Everything's ours now. Remember?" They headed back, stopping as Judge Shaw flagged them down. Despite his age, he'd taken on the challenge of rebuilding the legal system with renewed vigor. "Thought you should know," he said. "Got word from Cheyenne. They're making Bitter Creek the county seat, new courthouse and all." "More changes," Eliza murmured. "Good ones. I hope place needs law and order if it's going to grow proper." The judge tipped his hat. "Thanks in no small part to you folks showing what standing up looks like." The boarding house was bustling when they returned. 3 traveling salesmen had arrived, along with a surveyor and his assistant. Eliza moved through it all with practiced ease, assigning rooms and taking meal orders. Jonah helped where he could, but mostly stayed out of the way. This was her domain, and she ruled it with benevolent efficiency. Instead, he went to check on the latest improvement, a proper stable expansion to handle the increased traffic. He found Tim Rook there, of all people, helping to raise a beam. "Mayor doing manual labor," Jonah teased. "Even mayors need to stay humble." Tim grinned. "Besides, I owe you folks more than I can repay. Least I can do is swing a hammer now and then." They worked in companionable silence until the dinner bell rang. The dining room was full boarders, townspeople dropping by, even Sheriff Dawes wearing his new federal badge grabbing a quick meal. Jonah watched Eliza move through it all, solving problems, soothing conflicts, making everyone feel welcome. She'd bloomed in these months of peace, the constant vigilance replaced by something softer but no less strong. After dinner, as guests scattered to their evening pursuits, they found themselves back on the porch. Eliza had brought out the mandolin she played most evenings now, the music no longer painful but healing. "Play Shenandoah," Jonah requested. "That's a sad song." "Sad can be beautiful, too." She played, her voice soft in the twilight. Neighbors paused to listen. Even the railroad workers stopped their hammering for a moment. When she finished, Jonah pulled a letter from his pocket. "This came today. Didn't want to mention it earlier." She read, eyebrows rising. "The territorial governor wants to give you a commendation. Us, both of us, for exceptional service to justice and community." Fancy words for shooting outlaws and being too stubborn to run. Maybe, but it might mean something someday. When our children asked what we did before they were born. She set aside the mandolin. "Children, is it?" "Well, I figured. That is, if you wanted." "Jonah Pike, are you actually blushing?" "It's the sunset. It's charming." She kissed him softly. "And yes, I want children, though heaven help them with our combined stubbornness." A rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast. They tensed from habit, then relaxed as the rider resolved into a young woman on a paint horse. "Message for Marshal Dawes," she called. "Trouble up in Willow Springs. Claim jumpers." Dawes emerged from the boarding house, still wiping his mouth. "How bad?" "2 dead, families burned out. Local sheriffs requesting federal help." Dawes sighed. "Tell them I'll ride out at first light." He looked at Jonah. "Don't suppose you'd want to come along, could use a steady hand." Jonah felt the old pull, the call to action, to matter in the world. Then Eliza's hand found his. "Thanks, but I've got commitments here. Teaching tomorrow. Remember?" Dawes nodded, understanding. "Fair enough. Man's got to know when he's found where he belongs." As night fell and the boarders settled in, Jonah and Eliza remained on the porch. The stars emerged one by one, brilliant in the clear air. "Any regrets?" she asked quietly. "About what?" "Staying. Building a quiet life instead of chasing the next fight." He thought about it seriously. No regrets. This what we have, it's what I was fighting for all along. Just took me a while to realize it. Even when it's ordinary, serving meals and splitting wood and teaching farm boys to shoot straight. Especially then. He pulled her close. Ordinary means we won. Means the bad men didn't break us. Means we get to wake up tomorrow and choose how to live. She was quiet for a moment. Thomas would have liked you, the real Thomas, before the schemes and drinking. He believed in building things too. Then I'm honored to continue his work, our work. A lamp flared in an upstairs window, one of the boarders settling in for the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new faces, new possibilities. The railroad would connect Bitter Creek to the world, for good and ill. But tonight there was peace, hard-won and precious. "Come on," Eliza said, standing. "Early morning tomorrow, and you need to review your lesson plan if you're going to teach Emma Morrison to shoot." She really is persistent. Gets it from somewhere. Eliza smiled. Maybe it's something in the water here. Makes people stubborn, unwilling to give up. Thank God for that, Jonah said, following her inside. The boarding house settled into quiet, another day ending in Bitter Creek. But it was no longer the frightened town where a widow stood alone against outlaws. It had become something more, a community that had learned to stand together, to fight for justice, to build rather than tear down. And at its heart, two people who'd found love in the midst of chaos, proving that sometimes the greatest courage wasn't in the fighting, but in choosing to stay, to build, to hope. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, But in the warmth of Hart's boarding house, the Pike House, now life went on. Ordinary, precious, and free. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges. But tonight, there was peace. And that was enough. That was everything. Thank you all for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Please share in the comments below where you're listening and what you thought of Jonah and Eliza's journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Night and hit that like button. And if you really enjoyed this story, please support us by clicking the hype button so more people can discover these tales from the American frontier. Until next time, partners.